One of the things that's been clear over the past few years is that we want to make a real effort to make sure the board's fully aware of the actual report that comes out. This is our main pension system through MERS. We have two pension systems. We have the one that's the larger one through the state, which is before you this evening. Then we have our own township pension system, which is closed out, which is the township. We have a pension board that oversees that. Before I get into this report, which is really probably the most important presentation I've made in my short 5-year tenure here with the township, I want to say thank you to the board and thank you to our taxpayers. As you'll see tonight, we have made a significant turnaround in what has been a problem that's lagged us for more than 2 decades as we go through this night. And to you, Treasurer Brixey, you really I've been here, I know how this has played out, and I just want to thank you for pushing this along and getting us to set money aside, so that we could make these payments, and to the board who made these payments, and you realize your success tonight. So let's walk through this and see where we're at. Going back, this is a budget letter from 2013. I had been on board for about 90 days when this letter was authored, and the next slide will show you what was said in that budget letter. This is 5 years ago. That in 1 year alone, our legacy cost payment increased by $500,000. It was unsustainable back in 2013. It only got worse in 14, 15, 16, and 17. But keep that number in mind as we go forward in this report. In 1 year, we had to come up with $500,000 more just to make our required payment. Here's the history of our funding level. The actual report that just came out on June 30th shows that we have a 61% fund balance. Please keep in mind that that does not include the $1.5 million from the first payment from our millage, which was made just 60 days ago. And since it wasn't made in 2017, why? Because we didn't have the funding for the taxes. It was made in 2018, and so it's not included in these numbers, the additional 1.5. But that 61% funding puts us over the 60% mark, which is a reporting, one of the reporting guidelines for the state if you're under 60%. So we hit 61. When's the last time we're at 61? It was back in the late 90s, in 97, 98, when we were above 61. So in 2 decades, we haven't been doing this well. And this shows you in that slide 61 to 58 going all the way back. This is really significant. This is the ARC, our annual required contribution, our ARC, A-R-C. This is what we're required to pay into the system. This number has gone up for 20 years in a row. You always have to pay more than the previous year, right? Well, for the first time ever, our ARC, required contribution, has gone down. It has gone down significantly. We are required to pay $135,000 less this year, or next year, than we're required to pay this year. One would argue, let's keep putting in. This is a policy decision for the board when it comes time for the budget. But one of the things we could look at is continue to pay the higher amount and continue the acceleration towards 100%. Remember what we said when we went through the millage election, and remember the commitment we made to the public, and some people laughed at us, and they may continue to question us, but we said in 10 years we could be 100% funding, and we said that when we were only 58% funded and on a list of the state. So if you take a look at what's required, and this comes right out of the actuarial study, we're required to pay, if you want to get to full funding in 10 years, $308,000, $308,100. Well, what is that for a full year? That's just under $3.7 million. Well, what is our contribution going to be in 2019? The $2.5 million we're paying right now, the ARC. If we pay the additional $135,000, we're paying $2.5 million required ARC, plus the $1.5 million for the millage. That's $4 million. We're $300,000 next year beyond what's required as a payment to get to 100% in the 10 years. Can we rely on the 7.75 rate of return that MERS continues to use? No. And remember, the promises we made, talk about promises made, promises kept, This is one right here. We said we are not going to rely on the 7.75 rate of return. We're going to do something that a lot of communities in Michigan need to start looking at, and that is going to a 5.75 rate of return model. And this shows you exactly what needs to be paid if we go to the 5.75 model. So what is that? On the 5.75 rate of return, our payment that's required is less, still less, than the $4 million that we're putting in. Now remember, under the 775, it was 3.697. It was 3.7 million. On this number, it goes up to around 3.9 million as what our expected payment is for the 5.75. So what does that do? What is our annual payment at 100% funding? And I just want to take a minute and go over this slide with you and give you the exact numbers, because we talk about coming up, I believe Trustee DeShane talks about a global plan for roads. You want to talk about a global plan for roads? Here's your plan right here. Do you know that once we paid off, what are we paying right now? $4 million, right? 2.5, the ARC, the annual required contribution, and $1.5 million for the millage. $4 million we're paying in, right? If we were fully funded, like we're en route to do, what would our annual contribution be? $584,000. $584,000. That's the normal cost of our pension. You want a plan to pay off roads? You're creating one. And you think, really? Yeah, because look what happened in year one. Your ARC went down. That's exactly what we're heading to. If we were fully funded, we wouldn't be putting in $4 million. We'd be putting in $584,820, the normal cost of our pension. So we would have $3.5 million per year for roads. That's a really important slide. That's why we're doing what we're doing right there. Accrued liabilities. This is the public works slide. It shows that we're 85% funded in our public works fund. Above 80% is really, your pension plan is in Michigan, your pension plan is in great shape if you can get it to 80%. Public works is 85%. Police patrol, 77%. Now keep in mind, these numbers do not include the $1.5 million, which I'm going to get to at the end. Firefighters, 48%. Administrative professionals, 81.2%. Teamsters, does anybody remember what the Teamsters fund was last year? It was 16%. 16% funded. What did the board do? They allocated $900,000 in savings to put into that fund. What are we today? We're not 16, we're 89% funded. And the next one is a slide that shows, remember the changes we made? Not only did we go to the voters, we made modifications and benefits, correct? Are they working? Well, here's your new public works slide for percent funded based on a new multiplier of 1.5. We're almost 88% funded with new employees. It's working. Police command, just under 54%. And this shows your overall fund at 61.4%, up from 58. Next slide. Here's what we said to MERS. Okay, I know we don't have the updated numbers because we put in our funding in 2018, and this is a 2017 report. But we really want to know where we are today with that additional $1.5 million. Where are we factually today based on everything that we have and our assets within our pension fund? So we asked them to give us those numbers. And here's the numbers. Remember, police patrol was just 77%? They're actually 80. Police patrol is now over 80%. So they joined Teamsters, administrative professionals, and public works, all being over 80% funded. Year one. We have 9 years to go. They're already over 80%. Firefighters, they were 46, they went to 48, With the additional payment, they're over 50% funded now, but there's still $14 million in debt within the fire department pension. Police command, 53 to 55, and they're up now approaching 57%. And here's our updated account. We actually went from 58 in year one, 58% funded to 64% funded. That's over a 10% growth in 1 year in our pension fund from 58 to 64%. We have no reporting responsibilities to the state. And year one has been a huge success, the best year we've had in over 20 years in operating this pension fund. In summary, we have a long way to go. Year one was a big success. We are on par, this is a key one, we're on par to reach 100% with a 5.75 rate of return. We're not relying on 7.75. Our payments must continue to be made on 5.75 rate of return. 7.75 is outrageous, and the communities, over 90% of them, are still relying on that 7.75. Meridian Township is not going to do that. We must take all steps to bring the police department in line with everyone else. They're the only unit that has not had their benefits modified. And one thing when we talk about modifying benefits, I hope no one takes away that we have a poor pension plan or that we don't offer our employees a significant pension. Even with the reduction that the fire department took, and we appreciate that, and we're trying to get the police department to, they maintain a B4 enhanced pension. Not just a B4, but a B4 enhanced pension. B4 is a 2.5 multiplier. I think state employees are a 1.5. We offer a 2.5 to those who are modified, but it's truly not a 2.5 because if you've been here 15 years and you're at 2.75 and your last 10 are at a 2.5, you go out at 2.6, 2.5, 2.4, 2.64. So you have a B4 enhanced pension. You have the best pension that MERS offers, and you have it enhanced. And for the first time in over 20 years, our required contribution has gone down. That is the most significant telling thing in this report, that it's working. None of us thought that we'd have a reduced ARC. We'll pick up this discussion when we get to the budget, determine how the board wants to handle that additional payment at that time. Do we make that full payment, or do we take the lower ARC at that time? But that's an overall report on our 27 actuarial report.
Okay, before, should we first have a motion on this, please? It's a motion to accept the full MERS report.
So moved.
Support.
Moved by Treasurer Brixey, supported by Trustee DeShane. Okay, discussion. Ms. Brixey, you have your hand.
Frank, do you think you could make this, this is a really important report, and it's an important gauge of our plan for our residents to see. Do you think you could put the PowerPoint, make it available on the website for any residents who want to follow what we've been doing and check up on how our plan works?
I do, and I would even think we could go one step further. We could talk about this, but this is so important. It has been like the two hands around our neck in this community, and the grip was getting tight. And this is something we may even want to put in, maybe the supervisor, we can talk about this. The board, under the authorization of the supervisor, may want to put together a letter to the public and send this out to our folks. Tell them we were facing a huge, and you don't have to look far in the state to realize there's communities in our area and in the state that are really under a lot of pressure when it comes to the pension and OPEB liability. So it may be something we want to consider doing. We may want to take this message and send it out.
Mm-hmm. And if I might continue.
Sure.
Thanks. One of the things that you're asking us is about the making the ARC payment or not, and I'm just going to put in my plug right now, just like I've been kind of nagging the community, nagging my colleagues here about for the last several years, and that is we need to make the larger payment, and that's how we get ahead and get out from under it, because once we're fully funded, then we can go on from there. So I think this is good work. I'm relieved that our projections and that our deliberations on this very important topic turned out so far after the first year to look like we are on track. I mean, this is something that so many communities, especially urban communities in Michigan, are really struggling with. They're going to be facing potential bankruptcies, many communities, if they don't get their arms around this problem. And we should feel so fortunate that we were able to come to a great solution the way that we did.
I saw hands over here. Clerk Dreyfus, then Trustee Sondland.
Thank you. I'm very pleased also that we have increased our funded ratio from 58 to 61%, and that that's also that we're using a lower rate of return. I think those are two key metrics that we're moving in the right direction, even with reduced expectations. And if there's good years ahead, that's great. It'll move us further. And if there are leaner years, then those lower numbers would give us more realistic returns anyway. I have a procedural question. Every year we wind up we have this as an action item, and it says move to accept the report. What happens if there's really nothing, it's just a report? Why do we have to accept this report? Why are we doing an action where we're accepting it? Because what happens if we vote no, we don't accept it? What does that mean?
Well, what does it mean? Well, I guess it'd be just like you receive the audit. You receive and file the audit. You should read this. What I've heard, and I'm sure everyone at the table maybe has their own opinion, but what I've heard is that there hasn't been enough communication from the manager's office to the board. I mean, when's the last time we went over an actuarial in detail? And this is one of the most important. This is more important than our budget, really, because if this doesn't go well, we don't have a budget. And so I just think it's really important from this point. I made this commitment to you last year, if you remember. We had our first actuarial report last year, and I said, from now on, you will have extensive information about the actuarial, so no one's caught off guard. I think it just makes sense that you accepted and filed it. You don't have to, but I just thought it made sense, just like the audit.
So, yeah, I would say that it's very important as a discussion item. I just didn't know logistically that it really requires a motion. And the difference between an audit is that the audit is actually something that, I think it goes to the Department of Treasury. It's submitted that we're actually acknowledging if there was any material deficiencies and things like that. Well, this is a report from our plan. So it's just trying to keep things at a minimum. If we don't need to do certain types of procedural issues.
Yep, that's certainly up to the board. And if we had failed in this mission, we would certainly be submitting this to the state as well.
But I like the numbers. The thing to keep in mind as well is that we had 10 years as getting a millage in place. So if we make projections of what we're going to do when we don't have to do this, in 10 years when we pay this off, we won't, of course, have the millage. That money for the millage is for public safety. That money would not be converted into road funds. We would have to have the money that we're not paying. A case could be made for making a millage or something like that for the money that is no longer being spent on one particular millage.
Exactly.
Trustee Sondland, then I'm sorry.
Yeah, so from what I understand, these MERS actuarial figures were changed within the last couple years to acknowledge the fact that people are living longer and then ultimately are collecting more pension than originally planned and higher pensions because they're living longer, because it goes up with cost of living. And so I have to say I'm really proud of Meridian Township and the action that we have taken to get ahead of this, because of all the other cities, counties, townships who are out there, and all of a sudden they thought they were on track. We thought we weren't on track. I don't think anybody was deliberately not paying. I think everybody's been shocked, and the action that we took, we're way ahead of the curve. These other communities are also looking at, if I remember right, like some sort of emergency manager coming in. And so I'm just really proud of Meridian Township and how we responded to, it wasn't a lack of contribution on our part.
No.
It was the figures were changed.
Right.
And so I'm really proud of how we responded to that, and we're actually talking about paying it off. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if there's any other community in the state who's actually looking at paying it off.
Yeah. May I address that?
Sure.
Trustee Sullivan raises a great point that I didn't go over, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, the two things that were changed by MERS was the rate of return dropped from 8% to 7.75, and the mortality rate. They changed this because people are living longer. Those two things, if you read the actual report closely, there's two different numbers you can pay. You can pay the phased-in amount or the not phased-in amount. And so what happened is when they lowered the mortality rate, or they increased the mortality rate and lowered the rate of return, what's happened is communities have struggled to be able to handle that, so they've allowed to phase that in. And that's a point I didn't make, and thank you for bringing it up. We continue to use the non-phased in, okay? We're continuing to pay the higher amount than we have to. We could drop our payment significantly if we paid the phased in and took that over time. But we took it right away in Meridian, and we're paying the higher amount. Thank you for raising that.
Trustee Osler.
The other point I would make on that is that some communities are struggling to even pay the phased-in amount with the new mortality rates and
Right.
the reduced return on investment, just a quarter point there. I mean, that's why we had a vote on a Headley override for the county's operating millage, because otherwise they were going to be facing a budget shortfall because MERS didn't give a whole lot of lead time to municipal and local units of government on those changes that have very quick turnaround impacts on budgets. So not only are we not struggling to make that, we're exceeding, and we're actually increasing the funding. We haven't even made our first payment officially, so with the new millage. So Frank, my big question, can you turn the slideshow back on real quick?
I know somebody that can. Which, is there a particular?
The ARC payment slide, where you give the decrease in the ARC.
Okay.
I think it was that last one. I think
Right
it
there,
is.
yeah, right there.
Yep. So about a 5%, a little over 5.8 some odd drop in our ARC payment. How did, because MERS is only looking at 18 to 19, how are they smoothing that? Because a lot of the ARC payments depended upon how many employees turnover within the collective bargaining units and what the changes were within the respective units. How did they go about smoothing that? Because we might see that drop more, or we might see it bounce back up, depending on what assumptions MERS made there.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a 5 or 10 year smoothing. I'm not sure. I didn't ask that. We had a phone conference. Is it 5? Treasurer says it's 5. Yeah. So that's where we're at. We had a phone conference with a few of us with MERS on Friday, I believe it was, and went through the whole report for them. We had about 20 questions for them. But yeah, that's where we're at for next year. And like I said, I worked with a pension plan for 17 years in a community before I came here, and never had the ARC go down. Never.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, and I'm also in favor of continuing to pay the higher ARC payment. But I think, before we were talking about maybe a 13 or 14 point swing, but that was prior to binding arbitration on the other two collective bargaining units. So perhaps that's about right, but it seems like that might be a little bit conservative, so we might see a drop there. And then the only other point that I had, as it relates to the savings, the prior budget year we put in about 2.5 million, correct?
2.5 million, 2.508, 2,508,000.
Yeah. So, hypothetically, if today we were at 100% funded, our base ARC payment would be 580,000. So
Yes.
that saves us nearly 2 million. That's the 2 million you're speaking to in reference to other capital investments, whether it be roads or our stations or public works and all the other facilities that we maintain, correct?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you look at that page real quick, we're paying $209,000 a month right now, or 2.5 million, as you referenced, trustee. If we switched over to the phased-in amount for next year, we went from the no phased-in to the phased-in. If we cheated and took the lower amount, we'd only pay $190. That's a difference of $20,000 a month. That's $250,000 less that we could pay if we wanted to. But we made a commitment to our taxpayers about that.
And that's how you get to sub 60% funding in some
Yep.
cases, so.
Yeah, and people are shuddering in Michigan because my colleagues, in fact, we have our conference next week, and pensions, one of the discussions of that conference, and they're talking about MERS, and they're shuddering because they hear that MERS may go from 775 down to 75 or 725, or unbelievably, they may go to 7. And what that would do to these communities who aren't addressing it to their payments, that would escalate. And here, we're talking about basing it on a 575. So we're way ahead of what others are trying, and they have to address it. So that's our report, unless there's any.
Trustee DeShay.
Just a quick comment and a question. First of all, I want to thank you for the passion you bring to this and helping us to see how crucial this issue is. It's not easy to be impassioned about legacy costs, because by definition, legacy costs are something that were incurred in other times, but they're still everyone's issue today. We can't afford to bury our head in the sand of that. And it takes passion to take this issue on head on as we have. And we are fortunate, our residents, our taxpayers approved that millage last year. And by maximizing our payment and using that additional police and fire millage, we will get there sooner and hopefully get it paid off. Also want to thank the treasurer for her leadership and prompting this board and previous boards to make the maximum payment, finding the extra $1 million, understanding where our revenue is coming from, and helping us to find that extra $1 million, because it's making a difference. My question is, will we always be, in essence, a year behind when the MERS report comes in? It'll be one payment behind?
Right, yeah, when you do the 2017 actuarial, you're setting payments for January 1 of 19. That's the way the system works. So we're paying the 2018 payments based on the 2016 actuarial. And in closing, I'd like to also thank, in addition to the treasurer, I'd also like to thank our Director of Human Resources, Joyce Marks, and Mary Madison, our Finance Director, and our previous Finance Director, Gretchen Gomolka. She also helped push this issue along. We shouldn't forget what people do for us just because they leave our employment. And also to Carol Hassey, these ladies, two of them, Julie, they've been instrumental in moving this forward. I've had 5 people in my ear for the last couple of years, so I'm really happy about the report.
Chief Hall and Chief Cowper
Right.
as well on the collective bargaining negotiating.
Yeah, my final comments are, there's also thank you to those bargaining units that did step up and did accept changes in terms of future retirement.
Right.
Multipliers, et cetera. But also I want to mention that as a retired state employee, and my wife being a retired teacher on the state teacher retirement system, we recently got the annual reports on those two, and they're only in the 60s. They're only in the 60%. So at this point, Meridian's doing as well as the state is in its major retirement funds, and the way we're set up, we're going to surpass them very quickly, which is very laudatory. Thank you.
Thank you all
to everybody.
Thank you all for your attention.